and welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host Ray Smith, the historian for the city of Oak Ridge, among other things. And we've got a special guest. It's coming up on Halloween soon, and we wanted to do a couple of shows about that were fitting with that theme. So, Ray, you've got a special guest for us today that we're going to talk to. Why don't you introduce him for us?
Very good, Keith. Thank you. I'll be glad to. We've got J. Adam Smith with us. As far as I know, looking into the ancestry, I don't believe we have any kin. But if you go far enough back, you find that we're all kin. So another one of those Smith families in here with us today. But I met Jay it's several months ago now, when he came to Oak Ridge and was looking at the possibility of what might be available here in the way of a combination of the paranormal and history. Now, he's done a lot of that in other places. Has a good program in Knoxville. So we wanted to bring him here and let him talk about and help us to understand what might be the potential that he sees in Oak Ridge. So, Jay, if you want to say anything more about yourself, feel free to as we start our conversation.
Well, thank you, Ray, and I appreciate it, Keith, that you guys invited me here to talk with you. Hope you guys can hear me okay. But I'm J. Adam Smith. I'm a director of operations with Haunted Knoxville Ghost Tours, a nationally recognized paranormal adventure tour. It brings the whole concept of history to the next level when you end up bringing in the ghostly or the paranormal or even the conspiratorial or weird kind of happenings. I have been deemed an expert in the field of paranormal investigating. I've been on Travel Channel, got award-winning documentary, been on Tennessee Valley Uncharted. I'm also a writer with Paranormal Underground magazine. Equipment designer with Clowers Paranormal in New York. And I just absolutely adore everything that I do. I'm a paranormal historian. I love talking about the history of different locations, and I love being able to kind of look into it and say, maybe there might be just a little bit of a ghost thing going on here at this location, or some unfinished business.
How did you get into this? Tell us, how did all this start?
That's the most popular question in all my interviews. Every time I get on the radio or get on TV, they're like, what got you? I'm like, forced. I was forced into this field. I bought a house in my late 20s down in Florida, and I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in paranormal or anything like that. You know, I had a violin school, and by the way, I'm still a professional violinist and teach violin as well. And I bought this house, this 1923 house, and just weird things started happening to a point. I'm just like, this is, I can't push it away. I can't say this is not weird. And it really kind of got to the point of the highest level when I was testing out an air mattress in my front living room for a camping trip. And I got woken up to a male voice echoing inside the room with me. And we'll just say that really freaked me out at that time. I'm not, I wasn't trained. I wasn't taught. I wasn't up to the point that, understanding how to run teams and how to investigate and what's going on and why it's there and blah, blah, blah. All I knew was I'm frightened.
So what did the male voice say?
It was actually, it wasn't really a saying. It was more of a moan.
Okay.
But it had a bit of a emotion behind it. It wasn't a pipe, or wasn't anything like that. But interestingly enough, when I ended up doing research at the house, I found out that the house, it was never disclosed to me, in the 1980s was used as a nursing home. And my heart feels as though most likely that this male figure may have passed away in this house and might be a little unhappy, because a lot of these nursing homes, you got elderly or not getting, not seeing family, or they're kind of left alone, and they get really angry and frustrated and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not mad at that male spirit that was in the house, but it was extremely uncomfortable in that house. So, so it was the start of a beautiful career in history and paranormal, and through my own understanding and advancements, I've learned that spirits might exist, But what can we do to make it so that we can coexist without fighting each other or causing any challenges? So I've learned how to understand a little bit more about what are we dealing with there, and not treating spirits with anger, being understanding, maybe asking what's wrong, things like that, and we get some amazing things.
Wow, that's an interesting start. How did you get from Florida to Knoxville?
Well, through our lives, we go through changes and, closing of one door, opening of other doors, failed relationships, you name it, whatever it is. And I ended up doing a trip from Seattle, Washington, all the way to Florida. And it was one of the longest trips. And I think it's probably the longest distance point to point in the country going. But I was lucky enough to come into town and stay for a couple weeks with my sister who was living here, who still lives here. And I always say to people who visit this area, I says, if you stay longer than a couple days, you're going to start falling in love with this place.
It happens. It does.
So I did everything I could to get back up here into Knoxville. What can I do to bring myself here? So I'm not going to say it was an easy track by any means. I started out, doing industrial labor, really hard stuff, and then kind of just moving up, and found out that I have a passion for speaking and a passion for history, and found myself doing something that no one else did in Knoxville, and was a trailblazer. Really questioning some facts, because when I started researching hundreds of hours, looking for unusual stuff, I'm finding, my God, this city is full of tragedy and challenges and things that really aren't talked about in relations to unfinished business or paranormal. And at that point, that's when I ended up starting saying, you know what, I'm going to share with the world that Knoxville does have a past, and that past may not be very good, but it makes the city extremely fascinating, and it brings people who want those weekends to find out about the secret aspects of these cities that we live in, because I'm sorry, there's gonna be some things that we're not very happy about the past in these places. But I don't go to St. Augustine or New Orleans or anything like that, hoping not to come across a pirate, while I'm there, or hearing about a pirate. And I definitely don't want to be told that pirate jumped off the ships and was walking around throwing a bunch of pansies and flowers all over the road. No, they pillaged. Okay. It's part of our history. All right. I'm not going to soften it. It's the way it was, but it's fascinating as hell.
Well, I'm sure you've come across a number of things that were quite unusual in Knoxville. Let's pause for a minute and just give us a couple of examples of the kind of things that are most intriguing to you about what you found out in Knoxville on the history.
Well, it really, the first thing that drew my attention to Knoxville was it had layers of history to it. It had depth to the city, whether or not it was Native American land when we first settled it. Okay. Whether or not we ended up breaking 3 treaties within a couple of years' time with the Native Americans, and whether or not the Trail of Tears happened to come through the city, or whether or not we've desecrated Indian burial mounds, or whether or not we had a Revolutionary War fort off the river, or Civil War divided loyalties, or, challenges between the Confederacy and the Union even after the Civil War, and the death rate that was apparent that was happening in downtown Knoxville, how dangerous, or whether or not downtown Knoxville had tons of hangings and public displays and outlaws and you name it. It's like, okay, come on, let's talk about that.
You do know that Jesse James was once in Knoxville.
I heard that many outlaws did visit, especially Patrick Sullivan's, which was a very popular bar at that time. But actually, the most outrageous of the outlaws that came through Knoxville was actually Kid Curry. Kid Curry was part of Butch and Sundance's group, and he definitely caused a stir. Did you know that Kid Curry actually made Prohibition start early in Knoxville, other than other states around the country?
I did not.
In the city where Thunder Road was?
Yeah.
Where Moonshine was running?
Speaking of Thunder Road, there's a connection everywhere you go here. There's a fellow named Alex Gabbard that lives in Tellico Plains that I need to connect you with on the Thunder Road story. He's written a book about Thunder Road. So we'll do that. Now, we've talked about Knoxville, and you could spend a lot of time on that, I know. But let's transition for our audience to Oak Ridge. As you know, Oak Ridge doesn't have a deep history. I mean, if you go back like you did in Knoxville, if you go back to the time of the Native Americans who were here on the Clinch River, an interesting fact that you might want to know is that they were not Cherokee. The Indians that were here were the Yuchi Indians.
Okay.
And although the Cherokee signed the treaties and, you know, acted like, I mean, they didn't even believe anybody could own land. They just thought they were doing something to get these, get the things that the white settlers were bringing in, and they didn't think much about land. It didn't bother them to give away land that really wasn't theirs. They didn't think anybody could own land anyway. But the Yuchi Indians are the ones that were settled along the Clinch River. And then, as you know, in 1942, everything changed. I mean, just yesterday, I attended a ceremony at the George Jones Memorial Church. Now, you're familiar with that church because I think if you weren't a part of it, at least some paranormal research group spent the night down there with Steve Goodpasture, maybe a few years ago. But anyway, that church is where we erected a stone in memory of the Roberts family. Now, the Roberts family is the one that Robertsville's named for. And what happened when the Manhattan Project came in here down and started building K-25, they covered up a cemetery, just completely covered it up. And just in the past few years, a fellow who's descended from the Roberts family took an interest in it and tried to locate that cemetery. He found it. He actually used a dowsing approach to tell how many graves were there. And of course, nobody believed he could do that. So they wouldn't believe that he'd found the cemetery. So to disprove him, they brought in ground detecting radar, underground detecting radar from UT. And do you know what happened? Of course you do. They found the same number of graves that the old boy did with his dowsing rods. But anyway, they won't let him put that stone on that particular site because it's going to be reindustrialized and for a number of reasons. So he put it up here at the church, and we did that just yesterday. So that's some of the stories that come up to the Oak Ridge time in 1942. Radical change across the country. One other quick tale about something that was happening before the Manhattan Project here. There was a guy named Hoolan is his last name. Phyllis, I believe, I can't remember his first name, but he was known to go around the community. He never had a home. He would sleep on the front porches of the families, and the families would feed him, and then he would move on to another. He might stay a day or so, move on to another. I've written a little about that. I'll find it and share it with you because I think there's some stories there that we can dig out. And then, of course, the famous John Hendricks story that you're aware of, I'm sure. What other things in Oak Ridge would you suggest that might have potential for this connection between ghosts, paranormal, conspiracy theories? By the way, we talked last time about UFOs in Oak Ridge. So
supposedly Oak Ridge has had some experiences with UFOs. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Back in the 50s, there was
though the documentation is probably not that easy to find.
Well, it is actually. I found it on just Googling it, and it's FBI documents that actually documented it. So it's there.
Did it just get released?
Yeah, right. No, I think it's been out there a while, but I just found it last time we had a program. I just went on and Googled it, and we read it on the program. So what are your thoughts about Oak Ridge and its potential? We have a great history, and we've not done much other than what I've told you to actually tie it to anything beyond just the actual facts.
I would say that Oak Ridge has lots of potential. No question. I mean, any city that has history, especially history that wasn't so good,
Mm.
has always got a great opportunity. And one of the challenges I came across after our meeting that we had was the facts of me being an investigative historian and paranormal historian. The investigative part is the part that is what gets me going. It drives me. It drives me to uncover new facts. If there are new facts, I'm going to try to use those new facts. And the utilization of those facts that I have, one of the things that kind of concerned me a little bit, and I was kind of thinking about, was Oak Ridge, is still run by the Department of Energy, DOE. Okay. With the DOE, the way that they are set up, they have their view of the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project, Oak Ridge.
Right. Yeah.
Their view is to actually say that thanks to the Manhattan Project and atomic bomb, we were able to stop the war from going on. Not. Well, the problem is that that story there has other angles. And the question would be, if I, an investigative journalist and paranormal historian, was to come into Oak Ridge and share some of these facts that were counter to some of the things that they're sharing, would I be welcome? And that is a huge issue, because the truth is that I love sharing things. I love getting people to think, and I love saying this. Why don't you make up your mind off of the facts that you got here? What do you think? I'm not going to say, I can say that there's reasons to believe blah, there's reasons to believe blah. Here's my information. I'll let you make a decision off of the evidence I've given you and the information that's going. But the question would be, am I going to be welcome? Is a paranormal historian that is a researcher like myself going to be welcome in a city like Oak Ridge?
And I think that's a fair question. Over the last, and I'm one of those that promote this idea of that the bomb helped to end the war, and in fact has kept us from having a global conflict for 75 years. Now, I may be accurate in that, I may not. Over the past 10 years, maybe 15, there have been a number of books published that contend that there were things such as Russia entering into the conflict with Japan had a significant impact on ending the war, whether the bombs did or not. And as a matter of fact, the firebombing on Tokyo killed more people than the atomic bombs did in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It's just the fact that one bomb could wipe out a city versus hundreds of bombs. So there has been some of that, even to the point of attempting to rewrite some of the facts about history. And obviously, when I see that happening, I will contend with that, because I really do want the facts to stand out, and I want us history to be accurate. But I'm not so sure that the same sentimentality that existed, and let's just take the International Friendship Bell. When that came in here in the middle 1993 to 96, there was a significant number of people who resented and resisted that, who still held resentments for the Japs. And that was a huge problem. Now, and it didn't take but a few years till a young lady went to city council and got them to take the chains off the bell and let it be rung by anybody. One of the things they compromised on is you couldn't ring the bell. Well, shoot, the bell don't have that loud a noise anyway. But they took care of that. Now it's moved into a new place, a peace pavilion, and it's taken on a character that is not something to notarize or to emphasize the war and the bomb, but to emphasize peace and the friendship between Japan and Oak Ridge. And I think that's an interesting transition that we've seen over time. And of course, a lot of that, you have to admit, is due to people dying. Those people who have memories of World War II are gone.
That's what I was about to say. We've had so many people that have that held those strong fundamental beliefs and and were true patriots. I mean, they really were, but they were a sign of their time. And so many of those folks have gone on now. And there is a younger generation, but I would also say that probably your caution about whether or not you would be accepted, I think that's some legitimate concern. Like you said, we still federal town.
I agree.
And there's a company line that has, no matter how much the culture changes, it's slow. As we all know, it's slow for the government to change. So I don't know the answer to that question, but if I were you, I'd feel the same way. Even in the work that Ray and I have done over the years, documenting the stories of Oak Ridge, and we wanted to be fair and honest about what happened, but we weren't. But we had some challenges. We've always had some challenges. People were a little suspect about what you want, and if you come into a town like Oak Ridge with something that's as different and unusual as what you do, then people just would have a tendency to be even more suspect of that. And I think a part of that is because in the past, I know there's been people that have come in that wanted to take advantage of the story and sensationalize the story and present an image that wasn't not only, it's not that it wasn't, good PR, but it was probably not honest, an honest portrayal. So I'm sure people have been burned by that, but I mean, that's just my thought. It's you're probably legitimate in thinking that you're.
I wish I had a coin right now. I wish I had a coin, because with every story, there's two sides to that coin. And if I had that coin right now, I'd pull it out and show you, but I'm gonna imaginary coins in my fingers right now. Yeah. And the imaginary coin says that yes, certain aspects of the Manhattan Project may have been good, but there's also other areas that not really talked about, such as, we were fighting Hitler, and then we bring over the scientists over here. When we're fighting World War I, we're trying to stop Hitler from doing something and doing a bomb to create disaster in the world, and we bring over the scientists over here, and then we end up doing it. And I'm like, okay, that's fascinating. That's extremely fascinating. And then, things like Oppenheimer. Now, Oppenheimer was a genius. I mean, for the works that he did, it is absolutely ingenious. But finding out that after he saw what his bomb did, trying to go to the president of the United States at the time and said, look, I don't want these to be used this way, and basically got laughed out of the office and says no. Whether or not Oppenheimer has some form of unfinished business is I would say there's probably some form of unfinished, but guess what? Can I talk about that? Is it possible to be able to talk about that there is another side of this coin? There is a side of the coin that might be greedy for power and control. Who knows? How about the people that were basically not really told exactly what they were doing when they were being brought over to Oak Ridge for this new base that was being created, or the Galutron girls that had no clue that these dials that they're doing is actually making it so that boom goes over there, and how many people lost their lives due to that. So there is tons of unfinished business, no question about Oak Ridge, and there's a way to be able to approach it respectfully, but whether or not that it can even be touched on, that there is reasons of shadiness within the Oak Ridge area, within the secret city.
So I think you're right, and in fact, I have taken that idea. Ruth Huddleston is one that has done it really well. She's a Calutron girl. Didn't even talk about what she did out there until just recent years, when her granddaughter wanted to do a project about Oak Ridge, and she said, I can help you with that. I used to work out there. Her family didn't know that. She had spent her entire life in school systems as a guidance counselor. But then when I got with her and got her to telling her stories, we now go around and make presentations. When the Department of Energy brings their top officials in, they want to meet a Calyatron girl. So I get a call and I take Ruth and we go sit down and talk to them. When Lisa Gordon Haggerty, who's the administrator of the National Nuclear Administration, Security Administration, when she was first appointed, her first stop was Oak Ridge. So I got that call. We met. And when we sat down with her, Ruth and I have a routine we go through. I first asked her, what was she doing? What did she know about what she was doing when she was here? And she'll say nothing. She just knew she was helping to win the war. And then I'll ask her, well, what did you do or how did you feel when you first learned what had happened? And she'll say, I was happy because my husband, my boyfriend at the time, was in Germany and had already told me he was going to Japan. So I thought, this is going to end the war. He won't have to go to Japan. Then she got home that night and she began to think about and listen to the radio and see on the news, radio and newspaper, how many people had died. And she became very depressed and couldn't sleep for a week because she had had a part in killing those people. Now, when she told that to Lisa Gordon Haggerty, and again, we have this routine and it goes over every time. Lisa Gordon Haggerty got up real close to her and said, Ruth, let me tell you why I understand how you feel. Let me tell you what my job is. And she went on to say, my job is to have the nuclear weapons ready for the president if he wants to use them, and we hope they never use them. And it's that kind of interaction that makes this history so real, when people can give those experiences and actually have lived that history. And we're losing those people. We got a lot of oral histories, but we're losing a lot.
We got to
of
preserve that. We got to
$100.
preserve that. No, yeah. When I came back from Ireland, one of the things that it's kind of like I went to Ireland and I knew that I was supposed to go there for something. And I guess I found out, I guess you find yourself when you go to Ireland. And I think that's a normal thing for people when they go to Ireland. It's like, I go there and I'm just like, what am I supposed to do? And
yeah, it's on my bucket list.
Yeah, what I was told in my heart when I was there was preserve history by talking to that generation that is dying off about the myths, the legends, and all that, and preserve that. And it's beautiful. I actually interviewed I think he was either late 70s or 80s, an older man in Ireland, and he was talking about the Daoru, which is translated from Gaelic as water hound. And back in the late 1700s, that a woman who was washing her clothes at a side of a little lake was attacked by a creature from the water. And basically this gentleman was, he heard it from his father, and was sharing the stuff, and actually was the caretaker for the graveyard where the actual headstone of this lady is, with a etching of the Daoru is at. And I was able to interview him, and he drove me around through the mountains and showed me different places and the areas and all that. And I just felt like my heart was just springing like a spring, because I'm talking to this gentleman, about something that touches close to his heart. And interestingly enough, the whole concept of the water hound, it has changed. In depictions have changed from looking like a beast that was like a hound to something that looks like a crocodile. And that exactly, I mean, I brought it up while talking to him. I says, isn't this crazy? And then I started asking, I said, what are some of the species that are here? Would there ever be crocodiles here? He's like, no, there's never been crocodiles or anything here in Ireland, but they did have unique wolves that were up in the mountains. And, what happened, the concept of, if you're attacking from the water, could a wolf still be in the water and attack from the water side of someone? It's very possible, but again, it's having fun and talking about these legends so that the future generations can learn, from them. So as you can see, I love talking about history, and I love, one of the facts that I always maintained extremely important to me for running tours in different cities has been the one fact of this. Am I going to upset anyone today with talking about this story? So a lot of my stories will go back to the 1800s, which is now 120 years or more from today. So yes, Knoxville has an old family legacies inside there. So there's probably still a little bit, but in general though, I would say that the stories are fair game. Okay. Talking about this is not going to end up having the state militia on me, and I'm not going to be put out for arrest for talking a particular way about these stories within the city. Now, Oak Ridge, we're dealing with a time period that is now within, what, 80 years?
That's right. Yeah.
80 years. And we still have the same organization that was running it then, still running it today.
Yeah.
So with that being said, is it really fair game? And that is a good question. I mean, I'm right now starting a new tour in Briceville, Tennessee, which is right up the road from you guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the Coal Creek Wars happened. Now, the Coal Creek Wars are within that time period. This little sleepy town, it's got some great legends, got some great history to it. And for the first time, I'm offering a public event right there in Briceville to investigate locations and history.
So you're talking about something that's approaching 100 years. So those Coal Creek War and even the explosion in the mines.
Freighterville was 1902, 1903, I think, something like that.
Yeah. So you got several generations that have passed. Here in Oak Ridge, we only got 2 to 3 generations.
Exactly. And on top of that, it's still a sensitive situation because it's not like the land Oak Ridge has changed hands and it's no longer controlled by the government. Right. It is still maintained and still controlled by the government. And again, any government's going to end up downplaying maybe a little bit, maybe putting it in the way that, because the truth is, the last thing you want to do is discourage people from wanting to join the military, to work for the government. And if you start talking about the possibilities that the government was shady, well, what you're doing is you're actually doing the opposite of recruiting that they're going to be needing to do. You know,
let me add another element to this that frustrates me now. The fact is that the history of Oak Ridge, even though it's fairly recent compared to the 1700s, 1800s, that sort of stuff, that history of the Manhattan Project, those people are passing away quickly. We only have a very small handful of actual people who live there. And the next thing that's coming along is the Cold War history. Now that is even more difficult to get a handle on and to deal with and to capture. Oral histories are good, but there are not that many people who really were involved enough in what was going on in the Cold War to know very much about what they were doing. It's kind of like those Calyatron girls. I mean, I worked at Y-12 for 47 years. I was there during the Cold War. I was working out there. I understand 8,000 people working around the clock, making as many nuclear weapons secondaries as we could make. We literally broke the Soviet Union's economic back because they tried to match Y-12 one for one. Only place in the nation that made these things for tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. Tremendous stories associated with that. And I'm afraid we're not going to be able to capture that history.
And through my research, and by the way, through my research, the reason why this is happening and why you're feeling discouraged with this is because that's part of the standard MO. If, for example, Civil War in Knoxville, I have caught red-handed the city softening the past of the city, you know, how bad it was. I actually went to a speaking presentation actually presented by the Knoxville History Project, talking about the 1919 race riots. Just telling you guys, I was extremely frustrated. I was literally biting my hand because I didn't want to be disrespectful by any means. But this black gentleman who has a book that basically, he might be 1 out of 100, that basically sees Knoxville as not ever having a major issues with African Americans and blacks. He's the one that happens to be sponsored by the Knoxville History Project. We're wanting that one person who speaks it in a way that we want our past to be brought up to be speaking. And I've got accounts, I've got records of hangings, I got records of blacks being abused, I got the records of KKK having their headquarters in Knoxville, I got all kinds of crazy stuff. But the concept is, the Knoxville likes to downplay it. So Oak Ridge, when people start dying off and they end up keeping their story within, one, that creates unfinished business.
Yeah.
Two, we start losing the truth of the past, and, I would like to learn from my past versus having past changed for the future generations from what it really was initially to what it actually is considered as today. Because remember, the victors, they're the ones who end up sharing the story.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Jay, that is fantastic. I was just going to ask you to before we go, to let our folks know where they can learn more about what you do and maybe participate in one of your tours or something like that. You have a website or?
Absolutely, absolutely. You can find us very easy. I mean, I could give you a website, which I will, or you could actually put in Ghost Tour in Knoxville, and I'm pretty much the first couple pages of Google. Okay. But it's hauntedknoxville.net. And in that website, it's got some cool stuff. One, you can reserve your tickets. Now, because of COVID-19 going on, we're trying to stay as safe as possible and try to follow and adhere to state standards. So with this being said, we went from private group tours that would normally be offered to private tours. So that means we're going to be offering less tours in the month of October, but we also are making it accessible for social circles and families and all that to be able to reserve with me and reserve their group from 6 people all the way up to 20. And then on top of that, on the 23rd and 24th of October, we're doing the first ever Briceville Paranormal Adventure. And it's a little bit longer than our standard one, so it's got a little bit higher price. But what's neat about that is we actually have permission. I've actually gone through all the channels to be able to have permission to be on private property and actually have access to buildings that have and locations that have historic merit to it, connecting to the Coal Creek Wars and the disasters that happened in that little community back in the day, which is absolutely, it blows my mind what that community did and all the questionable factors within the Briceville community, that these coal miners had every single right to be fighting for the rights that they had. The companies were breaking laws, and when they went to the Chief Justice of Tennessee, they ended up losing their cases. So at that point, the miners knew at that point that they weren't going to get a fair trial, and no matter what they do is not going to actually change anything. So with that being said, that's when it went very violent. And that point is when the National Guard came in. And that's when basically it turned into a pretty bad, hellacious event that happened there, in Briceville and Coal Creek area. And I feel so bad for it, but I'm very proud of those miners that actually says, this is what we stand up for. This is what we're going to do. And initially, I don't know if you ever heard of the story when they went to the stockade where the prisoners were being kept inside of Little Briceville. They actually put a jail for the prisoners while the jailers are actually working the miners' jobs. It was real nice. But they had 1,000+ miners surround that stockade. Not a single person got hurt. They escorted the prisoners and the guards very nicely to the train, have them go back to Knoxville with that. And even the wives of the coal miners were feeding the prisoners and also the guards. Yeah. There was no violence with the Coal Creek Wars whatsoever. It was because nothing was done to take care of them. So anyhow, going back, sorry, I absolutely love my new event, and I can't wait to start telling stories about what this is. But anyhow, you can get tickets there on my website. There's also a really cool page called Evidence that's brand new, where we actually have taken in video recordings during my events downtown Knoxville of crazy things that's actually happened. So we can tell you something happened, or you could actually see for yourself from participants' videos that they took while they were on my tour. So that's hauntedknoxville.net/evidence, or the evidence page. So anyhow, I'm looking forward to October and just having a good time and doing the best I can with this COVID-19 pandemic thing that's going on,
Sure.
trying to make it so that, still give an opportunity for people to enjoy a little bit of the outdoors and not be stuck and secluded in their house.
This COVID-19 has been hard on all of us. I applaud you for figuring out the ways you can safely continue to do what you're doing. And we really do appreciate your time today and your thoughts about Oak Ridge and helping us to understand that there are other approaches that are effective in teaching about history. And that is so important, to be able to convey our history to the next generation. And sometimes they need something more than just an old bearded historian telling stories. It might be good to have them engaged in something like you're doing, to get their interest and to get them to appreciate our history from a slightly different angle. So
Absolutely. And there's always, thank you. And there's always an approach that you can go and do that. If we can take care of my concerns initially, find out whether or not the city actually would be okay for a different angle, or basically putting a question mark. What do you think in relation to this possibility? What do you think in relations to that? And then, if it seems that way, like it says, I love sharing history, and I do know a little bit about the Oak Ridge, and I do feel like there's some unfinished business there, definitely.
Yes,
all right. Very good. All right, Jay, Ray, thank you. Thanks. And Ray, do we know who we've got coming up next time?
Yeah, we do. We've got Don Bell scheduled to come and talk to us about growing up in Oak Ridge. He has some wonderful stories about his life experiences here in the secret city of Oak Ridge.
All right. Very good. We look forward to talking with Don. And folks, thanks for watching today. We appreciate it.